listen first. Okay, so it's been really Eurocentric then. 19th century, the early part of the 20th century, when we talk about art history, we're talking about Italy and London and Paris. But that's not the whole story. And there's a lot that starts to happen, and there's a lot that starts to change once we get into the 20th century. So that's what we're going to look at today, is some of those differences and some of those changes. So we're going to shift that magnifying glass and see what's going on other places. So what do you guys know about American art? When we say American art, what does that mean? What are we talking about? Tell me where you're at right now so we can build on it. Good. Okay, you guys are excellent. And I don't know if you planned this, but I liked how your answers also built. Like, Carter, you started out with the good basics, like it's art that's going to show American style and American landscapes. American geography is not like anywhere else, because we've got the desert, we've got these mountains, we've got the marshes, and we've got swamps, and we've got coastlines. Like, we have something that everyone else has, but America has it all. So the landscapes are a huge part of what we talk about when we look at American art. And then Josiah, you hit on, there's two real movements that we talk about that are American art. American Romanticism, we looked at the Hudson River School. We talked about like Benjamin West and Bernstadt and how they like romanticized, especially those Western pieces. And then regionalism. That's what we're talking about today. Talking about regionalism, sort of. And yeah, Alejandro, timeline, that's exactly right. It follows what's going along in European artists, but then Americans just start to create their own. They kind of branch away a little bit separate, kind of the way America does with a lot of other things, right down to our version of English. Like, it's following along and then it breaks away and provides that kind of separation. Great, great answers, guys. So these are some of the terminology that come up a lot as I was researching on regionalism. I kept finding these words. So some of them I thought were idiotic, and some of them I thought were worth giving a little more attention to. So culture, we can agree that culture is pretty much an understanding of like the societal norms, right? That's a pretty standard definition. Does anybody know what genograms are? Yeah, me neither. I had to Google it. I was like, I don't know what that is. So let me tell you what I found, because it was kind of crazy. You guys are still seeing my slideshow, right? Okay. My other monitor is not working, so I'm like really working it weird today. So a genogram, it's like a pedigree chart sometimes, or it's a way of explaining relationships. So the way we see it in American art is this like breakdown of how people are connected, or looking at like a legacy or heritage, like looking at how people are connected. So not exactly a pedigree chart with a family relationship, but like the idea of ancestral or generational. Okay, the Great Depression. We're going to talk about that later. So we're going to talk right there. What about eco-friendly? Why would that be an art term that I would come up against? What do you guys think? Because I was surprised at how frequently I kept reading that. What's your guesses? No right or wrong answer here. This is a guess. Sustainable art. Okay. Like environmentally friendly kind of stuff. Yeah. I kept coming up upon it in that way, and also in the idea of being environmentally positive, and the idea of like portraying the need to protect the environment, or focusing on like protecting America's natural resources. It just came up all the time. What's heritage mean? I know it's a word that gets used a lot, but how do you actually define it? Okay. Yeah, it's kind of your family's past, so it has to do with history for sure. And like your history or place's history. Is it just that? Is it just a synonym for history, or does it have some other kind of connotation? Okay, so it's a history that relates to you, like your connection to that past, or like what that past has brought you. Yeah, that works. Okay, Alejandro, Carter, I see nods. You guys agree? All right, cool. Inflation. Is anybody taking an economics class this term? Yeah, okay, cool. I teach, that's another one of the classes I teach is economics. So who wants to give me a definition of inflation? It can be a group effort. You can chat it over. Yeah. So basically, inflation is when we see prices are rising, but the worth of your money maybe is or isn't, and so it's this increase in prices, which can cause a lot of problems. So when we see a lot of inflation during the Great Depression, which is why we talk about it, inventory, the stuff you have on hand, what you have in supply. What about a recession? Again, economic term here. Have you guys covered that? A decline. Good, Josiah. Yeah, a recession is a decline in economic terms. A recession is a decline in like GDP for at least 2 quarters. So we're seeing a decline in goods that are being sold. Regionalism. Okay, the word got introduced earlier as a type of style, but what does regionalism mean? Okay, a certain area or a certain place. Yeah, with American regionalism, we're talking about paintings that are maybe focused on a certain area, a certain place. America's weird. America's different. Josiah, remember your amazing spring break travels and all the different places you went through? Was every state the same? Nope. I mean, there are some things that were obviously the same, but you can tell when you're in a different area, right? You get a different vibe from people. We've been on a trip recently, and we're in a small town, and we had to stay a little bit longer at the hotel than the checkout time was. And so we went to the counter, and we were like, "Hey, what's the checkout?" And the lady's like, "Oh, it's 11." I was like, "Oh, well, could we get till a little bit later?" She's like, "Oh yeah, no problem, that's fine." Okay, because if we'd asked in the last town we were at, they'd have been like, "No, the policy is 11. Please leave." Like, just the attitude of the people is different. And so when we look at regionalism as an art style, we're looking at how those differences in attitude and in culture are kind of translated into the work. And that's why different artists focus on different regions, because they have that kind of a speciality. They have that kind of a focus. Who wants to give us a definition for rural? That sounds fun, right? What does rural mean? Yeah, a non-urban area. So typically we're looking somewhere that's going to have a lot of farmland, but somewhere that doesn't have a high population. It's not urban. It's not like that. Anybody know what a turbine is? Yeah, could be for planes. Could also, you can see it in really any kind of machinery, but it's the spinny part, the spinny part that makes the machine work. Yeah, like in a windmill. Perfect, Carter. Okay, those were the terms. You guys got them. I'm not kidding. I just kept coming upon the same vocabulary, so I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to kind of look at it. Good job with your word review for the day. You guys are amazing. Okay, so from that list, can you see any of those words in this painting? Yeah, definitely rural, eco-friendly. Yeah. Yeah, Alejandra, it's a regionalism painting. Okay, it's looking at this specific area. Yeah, Josiah, good heritage. The place looks older. There's definitely probably some heritage to it. I love the way the trees look, right? There's different kind of, oh, sorry, I scrolled. Um, like this tree with this like hanging zigzag thing, it's like very cartoony, like almost Dr. Seuss maybe. But then these trees look like inflatables, like someone just blew them up. Like there's maybe a bouncy castle over here and over here. Um, we do have one, two, three windmills. So we've got our turbines in there. And then we've got like some kind of factory thing here, but this is definitely a farmland over here. What would you say is like the tone of this painting? What's the mood? Serene. Yeah, it does look very peaceful. Like you can imagine it's quiet. If someone drove through and honked a horn on this road, everybody would hear it. People are just going about their business, living their life, doing their thing. Good. That's what it is. This is an example, obviously, of regionalism, and what we see in American regionalism, and it's that idea of shifting that microscope from what we saw with all the changes and everything going on in Europe and putting it over very specific pockets of the United States and letting the artists in those areas really kind of develop and build up those styles. So these are some of the hot words, the key artists that we see in American history. So there's this idea of the Ashcan School and the Eight. Do you guys remember that from the lessons? Okay, it mentions it just real quick. But that's really the closest we have to any kind of a school or like a style piece with this. But when it comes to American regionalism, it's really just artists breaking away from whatever the European influence was that they were experiencing, and kind of just doing their own thing. But instead of their own thing being splatter painting or Dada, their own thing is these very focused, idealized sometimes criticisms of their regions, of their areas, and really pulling from what it is to be there, what it is to live there, what it is to feel there. And they have this tie into the idea of illustration. They're very narrative pieces, right? Is there a story to this painting here? Could you fill in and make a story to this? Yeah. Um, and that's part of it too, is this idea of they're illustrating what's going on. They're showing and focusing and really zooming in on these little pieces. So we're going to talk specifically just about Grant Wood and Edward Hopper at the end of the list, but all of them fit in as good examples. And there's others. Norman Rockwell is a good example of American regionalism. But what makes him different is that instead of kind of going with the art style and like focusing in on one area, he really leaned into that illustration, and into that storytelling piece. And then when regionalism kind of faded out, Norman Rockwell stayed, which is fun and great. So what could be the story here? Mhm. That could be people pulling up, needing a rest stop here, with guys out monkeying with the pump, trying to make it work. It's not a huge stretch of the imagination to fill in the details, right? Yeah, we know what these stories look like. So pretty different from last week's Mark Rothko color fields, right? Where you have to fill in everything and you're just overwhelmed by the color. This is doing that other thing that art can do, and tell the story and kind of recreate that. As far as artistic pieces, what are the lines or the shape? Are there any of those artistic elements? Is there movement or balance? Is there linear perspective or pyramid configuration? Do we see any of those pieces at work? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good, you both picked up on that. Especially I see it in the like the wheat or whatever this is along here, and how the brushstrokes make it look like there's movement, kind of impressionist here. Repeating shapes and patterns. Yeah, the lines of the gas station are very rigid. The natural lines are very flowing. We've got all of the red is in the structures here. And there isn't any red in the natural surroundings. So we could talk about like the man-made versus nature. So there's all those pieces there too. Yeah. So I like that. It looks very soft. It does. What about this one? Can there be a story here? Yeah. What elements or principles of art can you find in this one? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Carter, the perspective is really a key piece, and it's yeah how it like curves in, and like we see the folds of the fields, and then like there's in the distance you can see like the curve of the earth basically all the way out here on the horizon line. That's good. It's got that same kind of inflated look that we saw in that first painting with the trees, like the way the earth is kind of bubbled up in there. Lots of curves and organic shape. Narrow color field. It looks like it's just a few colors with different shapes. Yeah, I mean, it's what? Brown, green, shades of white, basically. Oh, that's good, Alejandro. There is some chiaroscuro with the lighting and how like strong the contrast here, like on the cloud and the tree and here in the shade, you can see that depth. That's good. I think it's really interesting how detailed these flowers are right here. Like these are apple blossoms. Like that's 100% what these are. But then how kind of vague things are back here in the distance. You know, we've got that like we saw with American Romanticism, you know, having that detailed foreground and then the blurred out, faded out background. So we've got those same elements in there. Thanks, guys. Okay, what do you see here? I promise this is the last one that I'll ask the same question for. Then we'll talk about something else. But what do you see with this one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So organic shaped curve lines. I don't know if there is a right angle anywhere in this painting, actually. Yeah, to the point that it is distorted. There is some distortion. The perspective, it's not as clear as last time. This isn't a photograph, obviously. You can't recreate this place because gravity just wouldn't work. And the way that people are with like their own bent over working and their curved shape, it's almost as if they're not real people. Like they're just part of the figures in the background. They're just part of the shapes of the field. The straw of the hay to do some realism, though they are pretty detailed. Yeah, the straw of the hay is cool. It's like cartoony is the word that I think of. It's realistic, but not quite. It's a little bit different in there. And even the way the clouds come in the background and like do that same swoop, and it swoops the same way the hill does. So lots of fluidity here. Good. Okay, we're not talking about this one anymore. But can you see kind of some similarities of style? Like we've got Grant Wood with like that flowing, curvy, inflated thing. Edward Hopper with some detail, some realism, those fine brush strokes, lots of detail. Thomas Benton Hart is very much this kind of look, these very organic flowing shapes. So the 20th century is a little bit wild. Lots of things happening, but we want to zero in on American regionalism, which means we're going to be zeroing in on the 1930s, and we're going to be zeroing in on the 1940s. So what is happening? What are the major events of these years? Yep. Great Depression for sure. World War II. The end of the Great Depression, which is also World War II. Yes, Josiah, that's what matters to me, actually. I love the movies of this era. It's my favorite. So cinema and entertainment. And by that, I also mean radio. Good. What is life like? How are these events going to impact everyday people? Bad. How so? Because you're not wrong, Carter. But like, what's going to make it bad? Yeah, there's the economic recession. So there's high unemployment. People are losing their savings. Inspired to create art reflecting the time. I like it. I think, can I have that question up here somewhere? Yeah, that's good, Alejandro. Sorry, I thought I had a thing, but it's not popping up. Yeah, the art, to reflect the time and show what's going on, what people are experiencing. With cinema and the movies, for the most part, it's a kind of escapism. And we see Shirley Temple movies and the introduction of musicals, and really that kind of escapism to get away from it. But in higher art, in painting especially, it's this kind of a reflection. But the reflection is not so much on the bad as it is on the everything. It's a kind of stoicism and accepting, like, hey, this is what's going on, and these are the people who are tough enough to survive. This is the area, and this is how we get through it. It's very like self-reliant is a big idea here. Even though things are hard and things are difficult, like these are the people that get through it. Those are really the messages that we see in a lot of this. Let me clear this off. Sorry, the annotation pen won't go away. There we go. So I snagged a quick newsreel to set the tone for us before we look at a couple more things. So you guys down for, okay, imagine you're in the movies, you've got a nickel's worth of popcorn, you're ready to watch a movie, but first, newsreel. Okay, did it just go away for you guys? Okay, me too. I don't know what happened. Let me see if I can get it pulled back up. Is it still sharing the screen? Okay. Let's try again.
The Great Depression left millions of able and willing Americans bewildered and jobless. In 1933, the federal government came to the help of local agencies which had fought a courageous but losing fight against the growing need for relief. 120,000 projects that are embraced by the Works program. Each of these projects has been planned to meet a real need in the community which it serves, to take care of the unemployed, as well as to confer real and lasting benefits on the people of the United States, is the object of the WPA. And in finding suitable work for musicians and other artists, the WPA has contributed greatly to the culture of America. A typical project is this Negro choir, singing the spirituals that are the real folk music of America. Painters, too, contribute their bit to making the Works program a real and permanent accomplishment. Some of this work is done on canvas, but much of it is created on the walls of our schools, libraries, and other public buildings in the form of mural paintings. One of the outstanding cultural achievements of the Works program is the Federal Theater. For many years, vast sections of our country have not seen a flesh and blood theatrical performance.
Okay, thanks. I don't know what happened, but I'm glad we got to watch it. So what were some of the things that the WPA did? Put on circuses and plays. They did. That was one of them. That's true. Encourage people to get some work. That is true. More than even encourage, the WPA was one of the New Deal programs. Remember FDR and the New Deal, and it was one of the 3 R's of how to help the country get out of the recession, and that was recovery. It was getting people to work. And one of the problems of the Great Depression was that there just weren't enough jobs anymore because of the recession, because there was this loss of employment opportunities. People didn't have money to hire more people, so people were going without, and unemployment was a huge problem. And so the government combated that by creating all of these work programs to hire people and pay them for doing work. And one of them was the WPA, and it's so Work Project Administration, and it hired people to do these public works like put on plays, fund choirs, paintings, and it was a way of doing jobs that kind of needed to be done. There's some more extreme programs like the Tennessee Valley Authority that provided electricity, which was a big deal, and the Civilian Conservation Corps that put up like trails in national parks. So they did these kind of public works projects that were going to benefit everybody. The government paid them, and it helped get unemployment under control. But one thing that's really neat about the WPA is that it would provide these paintings into rural places, and it paid artists to put on these works. So this is the post office from my hometown. It looks just like that. It was built as a part of a WPA project in 1935, and inside is this mural, and it's kind of unimpressive the way this photo is, so I'll show you another photo in a minute. But it's a photo of a massacre, actually. A division of Custer's army killed a native settlement in the winter, and it was terrible and awful, and not many people survived, but it's a big historic event in that town. And so the WPA built the post office, replaced a wood log post office that, I'm not kidding, the Pony Express used to use. Like, they built an actual building, and then paid an artist to come and paint this mural of the town's event. And there are post offices like this, the exact same layout, all over the country with similar works of arts inside them. They also have them in some libraries, in community centers, and it was a way of getting people to work and paying them to work. But it had this fun side effect of creating these scenes of American history and regional history, and giving these artists a chance to work on American things. So this is, again, the mural from my post office. And it's not exactly a happy topic, but it is impressive. It's really impressive when you can see it in person. So here's the review. Government funded art projects. Why, what, and where? So why is the government funding art projects? Help get people out of the depression, deal with the unemployment. What are the projects? What kind of things are they doing? Alejandro, hot word, to create propaganda. Absolutely, that's part of it. Send this message that people are working to focus on these historical events and kind of build up. Josiah, yes, they're focusing on historical moments, or if they're, if your town doesn't have a massacre, which would be nice, then often it was just scenes of agriculture or settlement, looking at that heritage piece. And then where did they put them? Where can we find these examples? Schools, WPA buildings, good, which is going to be schools, courthouses, city offices, post offices. Post offices were huge because every town needs a post office, and a lot of them were built pretty ad hoc, and so they needed real ones. Okay. Good. So think about your home and wherever you think of as your hometown. What would you make a painting of? The WPA hired you to paint a mural of your home. What story would you pick? And it could be your town, it could be literally your home, but what would you pick? Take a minute and think. That sounds great, Alejandro. Painting of restaurants, Cascard's overflowing with them. That's a good point, Josiah. Yeah, and paint the Indian reservation that made up that was where Maricopa used to be. Landscape of mountains and its trails. Carter, that sounds great. That's perfect then. That's perfect. Thanks, guys. Everywhere has some kind of history and some kind of heritage element, and that's a lot of what these were doing as well, is kind of catching them and sharing them. This is really the most iconic shot we get of American regionalism. What do you guys know about this painting? Yeah, Josiah, you hit right on the heart of it. Yeah, there's a lot of actually controversy kind of around it as to whether or not it's mocking or kind of honoring these people. So yeah. So yeah, the artist who painted it, Grant Wood, he was an American regionalist painting, and he focused on Iowa and that kind of Iowa farmer, stubborn, hard-nosed attitude that, if you know someone from Iowa, that is something they pride themselves on. And he wanted to capture that. So the man is actually his dentist. Like, he knew this man. And I can't remember if the woman is his wife or not, but he had them pose and painted them and painted the background. It is called American Gothic, and it's pretty iconic. What about this would make it iconic? Why is this something that people would continue to show? Have you ever seen it where it gets like copied and they change the people in front of it? There's Simpsons ones, there's ones with different people in the picture. Why would this image impress people? Why is it something that people would continue to see and talk about and recreate? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good. And that's what Woods was hoping to get, was that kind of glimpse into the eyes of rural American. Carter, I think that's what people continue to like about it so much, is it kind of represents this American style and this heritage, this idea of this is who people are, this is who people were, this is like salt of the earth. But their face really does tell everything. The man's face is indescribable sometimes. Rigid, lined, like well carved, and he's just staring at you or maybe past you. And I think that's part of it as well. And we're going to watch a video about it, but I think we'll skip it for today because we've kind of hit on it. Do you guys think that this is a criticism, or is this honoring the people, just based on what you currently have in your backpack of knowledge? Carter says honoring. Alejandro, both? Josiah, I think that's fair too. Yeah. Woods never really clarified it. And from what his writing says, it sounds like he was intending it to just be a recreation of who they are. And this idea of mocking kind of came in later. But Alejandro, I think it can also be both. And I think it's definitely possible to maybe make fun of someone without meaning to. The thing that you like or are applauding them for is maybe not something they want to be stood out for. So Grant Woods was classically trained. He trained in France. He trained under a number of different people, and then came back to America and felt like he really just wanted to be here and do this kind of regional work, that he didn't need more, and he didn't need to follow what was going on in the art world to be kind of this powerful artist. And we get through the Great Depression and these WPA programs, and then we have World War II, which has been going on in Europe for a while, but the U.S. enters obviously after Pearl Harbor, and so we're still looking at these same decades. But how is the U.S. entry into World War II going to change things? What kind of effects is that going to have on any level? Yeah, good. Okay, you guys covered a bunch of different areas. Definitely changes the nature of World War II. American entry in Europe and then in the Pacific just changes the whole dynamic of the war. It's a serious turning point there. And then the mobilization that goes on the home front to get the U.S. involved in the war changes the U.S. economy. People have jobs, people have productions. WPA programs stop because the government doesn't need to be paying people to paint murals. They need to be paying them to build airplanes and tanks and learn how to operate them. So that changes everything. Switches to a very industrial way of life. Carter, you're exactly right. People that had been trying to get along agrarian are now plenty of work in wartime factories, in manufacturing, if not actually in enlistment. So lots of things. And then there's a lot of sentiment, a lot of attitude. We talked a little bit about anti-war work with like Picasso's Guernica. There's a lot of pro feelings in America at the time, so we don't see a lot of against it at first, but we do see some. So this is Edward Hopper, and he's also an American regionalist, but his paintings really come out during the war years. So his highest, like his key points are in 1942 and 1943, and so we want to have in mind the idea that the world is at war for some of his works, and that kind of changes what he's saying. So I thought these two quotes were really interesting. The whole, this idea, he's the father of a whole school of art that takes as its subject matter threshold spaces, buildings that lie outside of homes and office, places of transit where we are aware of a particular kind of alienated poetry. You guys ever heard of the idea of a liminal space? It's the idea of a place that exists outside of time, like whatever's going on there, it doesn't really connect to everywhere else. So often airports are considered, or gas stations, places where you're there because you're going somewhere else, and that place is just a transit spot. And a lot of Edward Hopper's work is that idea of this liminal space, that it's somewhere that people are while they're waiting to go or do somewhere else. It's not, it's not Mary Cassatt with these like intimate home portraits, or even what we were seeing with Grant Wood of this idea of heritage. It's more of what people are doing, where they're going, and it's very disconnected. This idea of a threshold space of what's on the entrance, what's on the entryway. So, and then Hopper himself said, I think American scene painters caricatured America, and he always wanted to do it himself. He wanted to paint America kind of the way he saw it and not this cartoony version. So here are some of his works. This one is my favorite, by the way. It's called The Intermission. And I think it still does that kind of storytelling piece. I mean, you can fill in the details about this woman, about where she is. It's got that waiting idea. And this is his most famous piece called Nighthawks. And I love this sketch progression I found of kind of how he created it, with where the pieces start to the end version. And actually, this was not intentional, but this is a good segue for our essay. This diagram I found was on a writer's workshop, and the idea of using this kind of sketch progression in your writing, and the idea, okay, this is the outline of where I want to go, this is my thesis, this is my stand, these are the pieces that are going to help me. This is where he starts to pull in those awnings, the shading, like, oh, the man in the hat, the man with the back, and fill in those pieces. So just something to think about in your writing. So I have a really short video. I think we can watch it. That just gives some background on it, and then we can answer a couple questions. That sound okay? Okay. All right, here we go.
We're in the Art Institute of Chicago, and we're looking at Edward Hopper's Nighthawks from 1942, this classic American painting that's usually seen as an expression of wartime alienation, of the notion of separation, and it really is about separation. Look at the warm light in that diner and compare it to the exterior. You get a sense of the quiet conversation that might be taking place inside, but we have no access to that. In fact, there's not even a doorway to let us into this restaurant.
There's an immediate implication that we are alone. It almost starts to feel frightening.
There's a way that the painting functions as a kind of prism that amplifies or intensifies not only the sense of silence, but also the way in which light fills this space. Look at the way in which the warm light of that interior filters out onto the sidewalk, creating a series of shadows and areas of light that seem to lay over each other and create this complex set of rays on the sidewalk. And the way in which the light hits the glass as it turns around the corner of this building, leading us to that sharp diagonal across the street where that lonely cash register stands as the only recognizable object.
But you can imagine life around it at another time of the day. But now it's all eerily silent. And it makes us look up at those windows for some sign of life, but we don't see anything.
We can see blinds that have been pulled down by somebody at some point, but seem now completely abandoned. We can imagine perhaps the inhabitants asleep, but there's no presence, no even life.
And then we just want to know, what are these figures doing together? Did that couple come in together? Did they meet here? Why is the male figure sitting alone? Why has he wandered into this diner so late at night? What are they talking about? It's all very open. There's not a clear narrative here at all.
The only clarity is the sense of isolation, the sense of alienation. And I find this especially interesting if you think about the year in which this was painted, 1942, the height of the Second World War. In some ways, the cities were emptied out. There were a lot of people that had gone overseas.
It was a time of great fear and anxiety in America.
That's right. This was really the height of the violence of the war, and nobody knew which way the war was going to turn at this point.
And these are subjects that preoccupied Hopper for his entire career. Images.
There we go. Wouldn't unmute. I'm going to stop it right there. So with just the Nighthawks image, what does it say about America in the 1940s? What can we kind of glean from it? And how can we relate to it today, or can we relate to it today? Yeah, good, Josiah. Which I hadn't considered that before I watched that video, but they mentioned that there's not a door into the diner from the image that we have, and kind of the isolation of them. Like, they're very much in a fishbowl for us to look at it. It was depressing and gloomy, especially at night, right? I bet in the hustle and bustle of the day, that wouldn't have been quite so depressing. Oh, that's good, Alejandro. Kind of the isolation is caused by technology. He's looking at people, but he's not really a part of it or what's going on. That's a good connection for today. Hopper was really influenced by literature. I had a couple of quotes we were going to read, but I'm going to scooch on. What do you guys think of this? Is there a connection between these two? Obviously, the cultural and historic background is really different. We're looking at two very different artists, different eras, different styles, different continents, different centuries. But is there anything the same between the two? Okay, I see lots of nods, lots of nods. Okay, one last question. What would you say is American art today? Oh, Alejandro, you were filling it in. Yeah, the red of the green is very similar, like the way those two colors are played in. So we defined American art earlier as art that reflected American culture or style, that it evolved separately from what was going on in Europe. Would we change that definition if we're talking about American art today? Josiah, Van Gogh describes the cafe as a place where everything. Oh, that's a great comparison, Josiah. Like the night cafe, everything can happen, and the Nighthawks, almost nothing's going to happen. Just conversation and loneliness. That's fantastic. Okay. Well, guys, we are past time, and I know y'all have work to do, so we can wrap it up for today. Yeah, go ahead and finish putting your thoughts in the chat. Keep up the good work. Josiah, Unit I, Alejandro, Carter, finish up Unit H. Get me your rough drafts. I will give you some feedback to make sure you can get your full points. Yeah, Alejandro, I definitely agree. I think American art today doesn't have any kind of style lead. It's very free form, which is fun because that means we can do whatever we want because it's America, right? All right. Oh, also, I forgot to show you. This was my favorite Edward Hopper. It's a lighthouse. It's cool. Okay, that's it. Have a great weekend, guys. Keep up the good work. Bye.